So in previous weeks, we've looked at the difficulties that many autistic students face. And this week, we're going to be focusing on what we can actually do to support autistic young people in education. So one of the ways of thinking about how to support autistic people is known as the SPELL framework. Can you tell us, Jill, what the SPELL framework actually is?
Yeah, so the SPELL framework was developed by the National Autistic Society in the UK, and it stands for, the S stands for structure, the P stands for positive approaches and expectations, the E stands for empathy, the L for low arousal, first L, and then the second L stands for links. And it's a good thing to think about if you're supporting an autistic young person in education, because it can be a really helpful way of thinking about the person's experiences and thinking about, it's a good framework to help you think about what you might need to do differently. George, I wonder if you could say a little bit about that first element of the framework. So the first S is for structure.
So structure can take a lot of different forms. Often people use things like now and next, sort of visual timetables and things like that, so that people can predict what is going to happen next. And I think that predictability is the key thing. Occasionally in schools, you see it almost becoming a tick boxing exercise where people say, well, we've done a visual timetable and that's fine because that's what every autistic child gets. And that might not be what that individual child actually needs. However, finding ways to make things more predictable. So if there's something out of the usual routine happening, if there's a school trip or if there's a special event happening, finding ways to give that autistic student more information about it can create that structure, which is likely to help. Jill, do you want to tell us a little bit about the positive expectations and approaches aspect of the SPELL framework?
Yeah, so this is very much thinking about using the young person's strengths and using the young person's interests. And we have talked about myths around autistic people previously, and it, you know, some of the myths might be around not interacting with people or not having expectations of what people might be able to do. And so it's very much a strengths-based approach and thinking about using people's interests and using the things that people can do, the things that people enjoy doing, and thinking creatively and flexibly about how you can use those things to help people, to support people, to perhaps with the elements of education that they might find more difficult, more challenging. The next element is empathy. I wonder if you can say a little bit more about that, George.
So empathy, I think it's all about trying to see things from the autistic perspective, and particularly for non-autistic staff, that might be difficult. So I think that comes back to sort of trying to find out what the individual might be thinking and feeling in any particular situation, and using information from other things. So from these courses, things that you can learn from other autistic people, and really just trying to see things from that student's perspective, rather than trying to impose more normative expectations and understanding, rather than projecting your own experiences, because it might be something that's really rather different that's happening for that person. And the first L starts for low arousal.
So I think that low arousal builds on directly from the empathy that you were talking about. And if we're thinking about low arousal, then we're thinking about all of the elements that people were looking at in terms of people's sensory differences. And so I often think that empathy and low arousal work quite well together within the SPELL framework. So it's thinking about the autistic person's experience, thinking about what they might find difficult in the environment, thinking about all of the different, you know, the lights, the sounds, the people in the environment, the smells, thinking about all that and trying to get the environment as good as you can get it, making use of structure as well in terms of thinking about how the environment is set up, and thinking about generally what's happening throughout the day. I think it's important to also state at this point that we're talking about low arousal, we're not talking about no arousal. And so this is not about people having nothing to do. It's about making sure that we are providing opportunities, because the P element of spell, it's positive approaches and expectations, but using empathy and thinking about how we might do that so that the person is able to focus as well as they can on the things that are going to be most helpful.
I think it's about getting that right amount of stimulation. Like you said, it's not about no arousal. I think particularly if you've got autistic people who are also ADHDers, they might need an extremely high level of arousal in order to function. So it's about getting the right balance for the individual.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And so the final L stands for links. And I wonder if you might say a little bit more about that, George.
So links is all about it being a team effort. I often see particularly parents trying to support their autistic children single-handed without support from other people. And I think, again, with teachers, it can never be simply one person supporting an autistic person. I think you always need a team of people around you. And that can take many different forms depending on which professionals are involved. But I think it's really important to sort of spread that, not so much load, but also sort of get the information from other people, get other perspectives, and get other autistic perspectives in particular. So it's creating that sort of whole network of people who are supporting the individual. And all of these different elements of spell really just sort of work together as we've been going through them. We've been referring back to the other ones because they do just dovetail really nicely together. So I think as a whole, it comes together as a very sort of neat sort of way to just have a quick checklist of what are the things you can do sort of in a classroom, in a school situation, to think, you know, very quickly going through, oh, you know, what can I do to increase the structure? How can I sort of be more positive about this? Where am I being empathic for this autistic person's, you know, experiences? Am I empathizing with that? You know, what is the arousal in this situation? Are these things that are causing problems, or, you know, what can be done differently? And, you know, who else is on the team that I can also get support with this? I think as a whole, it works really well as a framework.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think it's also about, it's not about, you know, going through each of those things as a tick box exercise. And it might also be about on days when a young person might be finding things more difficult, working out whether there are elements of the spell framework that you can increase. So can you provide more structure? You know, what can you do with levels of arousal? And so, yeah, like you say, it's a real practical way of providing support that is good quality support. And that's not to say that it's going to be the answer to everything, but I think it might be a really good practical start point.